Mary, you had said earlier kind of this statement, but why are Catholics more likely to conform to the culture at large versus evangelicals?
Yeah, good question. The simple answer is there are a lot of people who identify as Catholics who have very little Catholic formation and may not be practicing as Catholics. So it comes up in the surveys as them being part of Catholics, but basically they're formed by the culture and their views reflect the culture. So when you see polling done where you separate out by whether someone is a weekly mass goer, then you see responses that reflect a greater appreciation for the reality, for example, of sexual difference. So evangelicals are really strong. They are the strongest category. So
Okay.
we need to speak the truth.
Yes. I'll direct this one also to you, Mary. Can you address furries, which are people who identify as animals? Is this the same phenomenon as transgenderism? And is this some future trend that's developing?
Yeah, so there is such a thing. Once the core issue with the whole transgender movement is the repudiation, the rejection of the truth about who you are, your sex-based identity as male or female. Once you reject it, it's sort of open season as to who you will identify as. You might identify as the opposite sex, you might identify increasingly non-binary, which means you don't feel like you're male, you don't feel like you're female, gender queer. Queer used to be a negative word and now is a word that's been reclaimed by the LGBT community to express a repudiation of the idea that there is a normalcy, that there is a way to be. So people will identify that way. Furries, identifying as an animal, is one more manifestation of this. And I will say that where this is going is towards transhumanism. Because again, once you repudiate this idea that you're a body and soul unity and that your sexual identity is given, and that instead you have control over who you're going to be, and what matters is your mind, then you can go anywhere, including the transhumanism thing, which is trying to use computer technology and stuff to recapture your mind and use technology to alter or perpetuate life. So,
thank you. This is for Father. What is your view of the rightful place of psychotherapy in the growth of a Christian?
Yes, so it's really very good. It's very important. I think it's more and more necessary, good psychotherapy. And from the church's perspective, it assists the person. There's no magic silver bullet that's going to cure these things. And nor do we need to seek that. But I do think we do need assistance in the pursuit of a holy, healthy, as much of peace as we can have on this side of heaven as possible. And psychotherapy can be really good for that. The moralistic therapeutic deism of Christian Smith, it's not putting down therapy. Rather, that's speaking to God as just being a therapist. So when I need something, I just call on God. So it's not a put down of therapy, and I'm sorry if that is perceived that way. Therapy is actually really very good, important. If it assists, it does not replace.
Thank you, Father. Dr. Sodergren, I'll ask this of you, but if anybody else wants to comment, what specific language can we use in speaking with people who suffer with gender dysphoria, who are considering surgery, and they're not Catholic or Christian? Any truth we can offer them about kind of that transition in love so they'll hear us?
Yeah, I'll share a couple thoughts, and then I'd like to hear what Mary has to say on this. So I think in a context like that, the most important thing is to do a lot of listening and asking open-ended questions. You want to understand and help the person to reflect on their story. How did you get to the point in your life where you're considering this? How does it, help me understand how this decision makes sense for you? How did you come to understand yourself in this way? And you show concern and compassion and genuine interest in them and in their life story. And through that, there may be opportunities along the way, although there may not be, but there may be opportunities along the way to insert some questions around, is this the best way? Have you thought about the long-term effects of this decision that you're pondering? Have you talked with people who have been through this, like real people who have been through this, not just a YouTube video, things like that. So I think it's important to approach them with interest and with concern, and not with a sort of prefabricated argument. I think it's important to approach the person like I'm trying to build a relationship and show compassion for a person, not trying to win an argument.
Yeah, so I'd agree with that. I'd make a few additional distinctions. It depends on the age of the person. So if you're talking with someone who's a minor who is expressing this, I think you have to be really, really forceful about what the truth is. They need to know first that you love them and you care about them. And that's where the listening comes in. Look, I love you, I care about you, tell me what's going on. Let me I want to understand. They need to hear that. But you don't have all the time in the world, and it's not like they're an adult who's already made decisions and gone down a certain path. They're like on the precipice. And when someone's on the precipice, it's an urgent situation. So they need to know what the truth is. And typically in a situation like that, it's going to start with sharing your concern for the person. And here's the truth. This is not a healthy way to go. You can't change your sex. What this does is it dismantles the natural functioning of your body. And again, it doesn't replace it. And I'll go into some of that when we do the medical aspect. So it's different if you're talking with someone, let's say, who's 40, who transitioned 10 years before. You're dealing with someone who is already in a certain place, and it's going to be much more complex. At that point, I think it's about establishing a friendship, listening, but being willing to draw clear boundaries. Because I think that's important, that we live in the truth, and we need to love people in light of the truth. So even if in that situation you have someone who's, say, 40 and they transitioned 10 years ago, that doesn't mean they have some sort of right to compel you to enter their narrative. If it's a man who's presenting as a woman, that doesn't give him a right to say, you need to be on stage with me and relating to me as if I'm a woman, because that's how I choose to present myself to the world, because it's not true. And we have a right to live in the truth. So it can be complicated.
Thank you, and that actually answered a lot of other questions that we've had about different ages and how to respond, so thank you. This question's for you, Father. Can you kind of talk about a pastoral response to maybe somebody in our church community who has already transitioned, or somebody who is kind of experiencing same-sex attraction or identifies as LGBTQ? How would you address them from a pastoral perspective?
Yeah, I think person to person, as is being said here, it's important. Each case is unique, each person is unique, and we want to treat each person with the respect that is their due. With that said, there are truths that are common to all of us, and I think the best way to communicate this is, if it's a specific one-on-one, sit down and have a coffee, a conversation, and to hear the story. Let them talk first. What do you want? What are you looking for? Because there's certain things that I can give, there's certain things I can't give. There's certain things, and being able to point people into the right direction. A forum like this is beautiful, but you're going to go home and you're going to need something else. This is a big brush. You're going to need a more fine brush in dealing with certain situations. But I think it's always like, listen to their story. How can I help you? What's bothering you? And you listen. And it is amazing how stuffed up these things can be in people. And when in a trustful relationship, sometimes over many sessions, sometimes over years, when it begins to come out, we begin to realize that this is not like the big monkey on the back that I've been running from, but the identity of the person comes forth. And together you discover that. And you find that. And I think in the work of healing and the work of priesthood and the work of being a friend, if you look at the goals of courage, friendship is one of them. And we live in an age where a lot of people don't have friends. And just providing that environment, it goes a long way. So I know that might be just a light answer, but it's really not. And I think listening goes a long way.
Thank you, Father. Dr. Sodergren, we've kind of discussed the female to male and the male to female dysphoria. How would you understand those who prefer to be called they as a label? And how can we address that? Anybody else feel free to comment as well?
Yeah. Language is really important. Mary talked about that this morning, right? They is a plural pronoun, right? They, in my opinion, it's not appropriate to refer to an individual as a they, because it already is a compromise with reality, you're compromising on the truth. This whole pronoun discussion, I have some kind of strong feelings about it, but it's never made sense to me that someone would tell me how to refer to them in their absence. It's hard for me to think of something that's more intrusive, for someone to dictate what language I'm going to use about them when they're not even in the room. Because that's typically when we use third-person pronouns, when they're not around. So I have a real problem with that, first of all, right? It's already an assault on my dignity and on my freedom when someone is telling me the pronouns that I can and can't use. But then also, it's like I said, compromising with reality. And the moment we start to compromise on truth, we're also compromising our ability to love. So I understand that some people, obviously I've just been talking about gender dysphoria and the suffering that goes with that, are uncomfortable for whatever reason with their maleness, with their femaleness, and the pronouns that go along with that. So you use discretion, you use tact, you avoid maybe using pronouns in their presence as much as you can, but I'm not going to use a pronoun that's frankly wrong, because I don't think that's a loving thing to do.
I suspect that Maria and Aaron will have some things that will be helpful on this as well. But I would just emphasize again, anyone who's asking you to use they has already made a decision that they're rejecting the truth about who they are. So the question is, are you going to validate that? Are you going to help them go down that path? Or are you going to love them in the truth, which means not validating that? So you can call them by name, and particularly with adults. Adults can call themselves whatever they want, right? You can change your name. I could call myself, I don't know, Attila if I wanted to, and if that's my legal name, you can call me Attila. But children, it's a different story. And pronouns take the place of a noun. It has a specific meaning. So again, you have to look at these things, the declaration of pronouns, the request for a different name, the changing the appearance, as signs and symptoms that something is going on. And you have to remember that person then has embraced a false belief system about who they are. And that's what you're confronting. This is a false belief system. So you don't want to do things that are going to keep them in there, make them feel, particularly with younger people, if you're an older person of authority, make them feel like, yeah, the path they're going down you think is a good one. Or, yes, they've got it right. It's a good thing to reject their sexual identity. So that's why I think it's really important. Look people in the eye, treat them kindly, smile, listen. People need that human contact. But they also need to know that we love them enough to care whether they proceed down a path that's going to lead them towards harm. And we have to keep that in mind. And the last thing I'd say on that is that I see, unfortunately, a lot of discussions in some dioceses about this issue where the only thing you hear is welcome inclusion. Call them by their name, that's what they want. As if that has no bearing to the person's contact with reality, where this leads, and whether you're ultimately facilitating a person down a path towards harm or doing something kind for them. You know, it's like if someone is suicidal and they say, I'm worthless, There's no reason for me to live. I shouldn't be here. Everyone else would be better off. That's a false belief. We don't validate that false belief, even though that person might feel more heard if you're saying, yeah, I get it, yeah, you really are worthless. We don't do that because we love people enough to realize this person's hurting, but they need me to love them in the truth. I need to help them to resolve whatever the underlying issues are and not facilitate them down a path towards harm.
Thank you. I just want to add one thing. Don't partake in the trends. A girl I mentor, for example, is at a very public university, and every class, beginning of the year, she has to say her pronoun, and she just skips the question. And I think that speaks a lot to who she is. She says her name, and then she just moves on. I think a lot of us are being forced to identify ourselves by he, him, she. Just don't partake, because that is affirming that that's a good trend that you have to distinguish that. So that's just a little story. Okay, so thank you to our speakers. I know we had a lot more questions than they were able to answer. I did my best to parse through them because I think a lot of them will be answered this afternoon. And if they're not, we will have time for more question submission, and the speakers will be around as well. Especially some of the legal questions, those will be addressed later.